Okay, I think it started recording. All right, so welcome to our person first language versus identity first language debate. I'm pause. I froze up again. Do I just start with my name? So I'll be like, hi, I'm Margaret Florence. I'll be the moderator.
Yeah, introduce yourself first.
Okay. All right. So, hi, my name is Margaret Florence. I will be the moderator for this debate. So there's an ongoing argument on whether the use of either person first language or the use of identity first language to describe individuals is ethical. It is important how we address others and how individuals address themselves due to the many implications and impacts language can have on others. BAFA highlights that autistic people are at an increased risk for self-harm, PTSD, suicidal ideations, and death by suicide. In this debate, both sides will discuss the importance and implications of using person-first language and identity-first language when addressing individuals with a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. The members of this debate include Grant Morgan, Tatum Capouch, Margaret Florence, myself, and Alex O'Keefe. Grant and Tatum will argue in favor of person-first language. Myself and Alex will argue in favor of identity-first language. All right. I think that was the introduction. So then...
It'll be my turn.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Margaret, for your opening statement. As Tatum and I begin arguing for person-first language, I think it's important to acknowledge that person-first language is the preference of people on the spectrum within the United States, and we should be responsive to the people we are working with. And we work all of us work in the United States, and we provide services here, and we should be responsive to those people that we work with. There's no one size fits all here, but if someone on the spectrum's preferences for language are unknown, we should use person first language as the default. Since as I was saying before, since we all live in the U.S. and work in the U.S., we should use the majority opinion of American spectrum. And for the description of this issue, the issue here is whether to use person-first language, such as person with autism or person on the spectrum, or to use identity-first language, such as autistic person or autistic, when addressing someone. In language, it shapes our understanding of autism and can have risks. Similarly to what Margaret had stated, risks, serious things there can be serious implications with the language that we use, such as an increase in self-harm, an increase in, or PTSD occurring, potentially suicidal ideations and death, according to the BOFA article. So it is important to use the correct language when addressing somebody. And I think it's also, regarding the description of the issue, despite the joys and accomplishments that many people on the spectrum bring, it is still a disability. And part of the issue with identity first language is that the disability shouldn't be the focus of the identity. We can show dignity for people by acknowledging their personhood before acknowledging their deficits.
Me and Grant both agree that we should address people using person first language, so saying person with autism rather than an autistic person, as there are many cases. We want to protect and speak up for the autism community rights, as well as protect them from
Okay, thank you, Margaret, for your introduction, and thank you, Grant and Tatum, for your opening statements. This topic has been an ongoing topic of discussion. It's not just important to address the topic for the sake of using the correct language, but also welfare of those individuals who we are talking about. How we address people, specifically autistic people, can have an impact on their lives and increase the likelihood of harmful risks to them. The risks Margaret outlined in the opening statement are very serious, and they can cause lasting effects for these individuals in their future. Can something as simple as changing our terminology be useful in minimizing these risks? With using identity first language, we think so. Today, we're going to address the topic of what terminology we should be using when we talk about autistic people. This topic is ever changing, and as research continues, our knowledge also expands. For some time, person first language was the default terminology. However, the shift to identity first language has started to emerge and become more desired. So what do? Should we be using person first language or identity first language? Throughout this debate, we'll discuss a variety of key points relating to what language we should be using. Margaret and I believe that we should be using identity first language when addressing autistic people because their diagnosis is a part of their identity. By doing this, we move towards inclusion and support for autistic people.
Tatum and I argue that it is derogatory to refer to someone by their diagnosis, and that's what identity first language does. And historically, I think it's important to note that historically, this type of language has been used to reflect people as both pitiful and inferior. It should also be acknowledged that the NIH, the primary governing body of health in the United States, has advocated for using person first language when personal preference is unknown. Identity first language was not historically used to reflect the preference of people with autism, but it was rather used to reflect the medical language.
Okay, so our first point for identity first language. So identity first language is the preferred terminology. So according to Don and Andrew, 76% of study participants with vision impairments said they prefer identity first language. The National Federation of the Blind also uses identity first language because they believe person first language is just the politically correct way to talk. Also, on top of that, state government employees were asked, and 60% of them responded that they preferred person first language. However, 26% also said that disabled person was equivalent, which can be argued as identity first language. And also, according to the BACB ethics code, we should continue to maintain our competent. Oh, pause the timer. I think I got my notes all mixed up. I apologize. I'll go on to this one. Captain Quirk conducted an independent survey on language preference, including 11,212 participants. Out of that, 7,491 of the participants being autistic people. 76% of autistic respondents and 49% of non-autistic parents prefer identity first language. Only 3.9% of autistic people and 70% of non-autistic parents prefer person first language. Got a little visual somewhere to show that. This visual right here. So if you see on this graph here, you'll see how preferences are broken up. So you'll see that the preference for both is 27.63%, and autistic person only is 51.62%, and person with autism is at 11.08%.
Thank you, Margaret. We believe that the person first language highlights who is a human before the diagnosis, in which there are more than a person who just has autism. the way we talk can affect our identity. People are a human before they are their disability, and putting the person first emphasizes the combination of strengths, needs, and experiences, according to Volta. Researchers from the University of Carolina and Midwest University found that parents of children with autism prefer this language to be used when addressing their child. This essentially just puts the person with a disability to emphasize their unique combinations of strength, needs, and experiences, both related and unrelated to their disability, by literally placing them before their disability. The BAC Ethics Code also stands on this statement as in Code 5.01 to protect the rights of clients and supervisees. It states that behavior analysts need to take appropriate steps to protect the rights of their clients, stakeholders, supervisees, in all public statements and prioritize the client's rights. And then in a visual that I have, it's about how you can address a person or people who have a disorder. So, for example, instead of saying someone is mentally ill, you can say a person living with a mental health challenge. Or instead of saying depressed, you could say a person living with depression. Instead of saying alcoholic, you could say a person living with an alcohol use challenge or disorder. And then, oh my gosh, I just X'd out of it. Okay, that was the scene anyways.
You said you're done.
Yeah, some attack that I was gonna end with. I think it's just saying that how identity first language doesn't, they don't emphasize the individual. They only focus on their.
Oh yeah, that's your attack. I have that.
Yeah, sorry,
Okay. Thank you, Tatum. You're right. It is important to acknowledge. I'm like echoing. Okay. Acknowledge a person's strengths and experiences. It's also important to accept these individuals as a whole, including their diagnosis. Using identity first language promotes a sense of identity. Having autism is a part of who these people are, and it should be our main focus to make them feel empowered to embrace this as one of their strengths. Dunn and Andrews mention that identity first language promotes autonomy, agency, and choice over one's disability destiny. Also within that same article, it mentions a quote from a psychologist colleague of theirs saying, "I am absolutely not a person with autism." This is coming from an autistic person themselves. The Ethics Code for Behavior Analysts outlines 4 core principles to abide by, one of which is treating others with compassion, dignity, and respect. Within this core principle, behavior analysts are obligated to treat others equitably, regardless of their personal identity, including race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, and disability. These are what make a person unique, and they are part of who they are. And then I have your attack, Tatum, after my spiel. So then my counter attack would be, because you said using identity first language ignores individuality and emphasizes only on their diagnosis. Then my counter would be, we would argue quite the opposite, actually. According to Botha, identity first language is seen as an expression of positive social identity and is redeployed as a form of empowerment. Our goal is to empower these individuals and promote a sense of positive identity. This includes recognizing and accepting their diagnosis as a part of who they are. And then I also have, according to Dunn and Andrews, using person first language might suggest there's something negative about having a disability, and it dissociates the disability from the person. And then I said, what would your response be to that?
My response to that, Alex, is that it's definitely not wrong to have a disability, and many people with disabilities have benefited our lives, all of us, and some such as Albert Einstein and Temple Grandin, for example, have gone on to do great things. However, it's still an impairment, and the DSM-5 even lists factors related to poor social skills as defining features of autism. We aren't allowed to bill for high-intensity behavior analytics services because autism itself is well, I mean, because we wouldn't be allowed to bill for it if there weren't significant challenges that our clients face, and I mean, and there are high degrees of support that come with the disability. Individuals with ASD have, for example, have an average life expectancy that is at least 20 years shorter than the average person, and there many people with autism have higher degrees of other issues as well. So it's not wrong to have a disability, but it is still an impairment. It is still a challenge that these individuals on the spectrum face, and we should not objectify people by focusing on their impairment, but rather embrace them holistically. And I forgot to mention my attack too. So social deficits are some of the key defining features of ASD, and identity first language emphasizes that deficits when when we should be focusing on the individual holistically.
Thank you for that point, Grant. So I'm going to go ahead and go in with that and just say that a disability is not an impairment, but it's rather part of the body. And so I go on to say, disability is not a state of bodily impairment. Individuals should claim the disability and have a sense of pride, according to Dunn and Andrews. Some adults see autism as a difference and not necessarily a deficit. I think we go into that culture aspect. It's kind of like a cultural pride to some people who prefer that identity first language. Also, according to Dunn and Andrews, the minority model or the diversity model, which portrays disability as neutral positive. It also asserts that a disability is a natural characteristic or human attribute and not a problem that needs to be fixed.
Oh, sorry. Okay, we've heard a lot of information during this debate. The end goal was to educate everyone about what terminology to use when we talk to or talk about autistic people. It's so important that we take all the information we heard today and continue to expand our research in the direction of identity first language. During this debate, we've heard both sides talk about preferences, identity, and impairment. Margaret and I have argued in favor of identity first language, not because we want it that way, but because autistic people have shown preferences towards identity first language. It's also important to ensure we are respectful and encouraging towards a sense of identity. We want to promote their autonomy and accept them as a whole. Identity first language encourages autistic people to claim their disability as it is a part of them and not an impairment. And Tatum.
Okay, so sorry, everyone.
It's okay.
As me and Grant have discussed, referring to a person with autism as a person on the spectrum is a formation that research has found to be immensely less offensive than autistic people by the community of people with the diagnosis. Both also stated that individuals on the autism spectrum are more susceptible to violations of the human rights, and that not the diagnosis have difficulties advocating for their rights, leaving them to experience feeling less than other people. Therefore, we should address people using person-first language. And to summarize what we've discussed today, it can be perceived as derogatory when a person on the spectrum refers to by these, as well as most Americans on the spectrum do prefer to be referred to in language. Person-first language emphasizes that a person's humanity is more important than their diagnosis, and using identity-first language emphasizes that a person's diagnosis is more important than their individuality. Although some may argue that using person-first language is a way to embrace and destigmatize autism, it is still a disability, and the wide body of research that conducts the link between autism and a variety of social, emotional, and challenges.
As ABA practitioners, we should acknowledge that autism spectrum disorder is a disability and that our services as practitioners are meant to help individuals on the spectrum blossom into the best versions of themselves while addressing that ASD poses challenges. As I stated earlier, if a person's language preferences are unknown, we should use person-first language. This language emphasizes the humanity, individuality, and the contribution to diversity rather than the impediment. It's important that we treat people by using their preferred language, and if that language is unknown, we should do as the ethics code says and show them dignity by embracing them as a person instead of addressing them as preferences.
Is it my turn?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I think I skipped my part of the conclusion by accident. If I remember,
you should go after me before they do theirs.
Okay, I will know that for next time.
But I think I accidentally said Tatum instead of Margaret. Sorry.
Trying to find the questions that we had to go with this. Oh, here we go. All right. So now we have our Q&A portion of this debate. I should have marked who the questions are going to because honestly, I can't remember right now.
I think I had the first one. I only know that because I typed an answer for it on the outline.
Okay.
I went second, and then Grant was third.
Okay, and I think I answered my own question.
Yeah.
If I remember right. Okay. All right. Unpause. So my first question goes out to Tatum. Tatum, does the way we address people on the autism spectrum heavily impact the future of the ABA autism community?
Yes, it does. The way we speak matters. If we're putting people who have autism into a different group solely based on their diagnosis, that changes the perception of how people view them and therefore treat them. And the world of ABA does not have the best history ethically of treating their clients with dignity or respect. So therefore, the way we talk about them, treat them, and interact with these individuals on the spectrum is very imperative to their well-being.
Okay, thank you, Tatum, for that answer. All right, so the second question is going to Alex. And Alex, what do you think is the biggest downside to the form of language that you are arguing for?
Thank you for that question, Margaret. The biggest downside to using identity-first language is that it's still an evolving topic. We discussed how person-first language was the original language, but as time goes on, researchers have found more preference towards identity-first language. Because there's not enough research to fully understand all aspects of identity-first language and the effects it has on autistic people, there may be some resistance to accepting it as the primary language. This does not mean that we should just disregard it, though. We need to continue research and continue expanding our knowledge on this topic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alex. All right, so this third question will be for Grant. And Grant, Should we be using the same terminology for all conditions? For example, a person with diabetes as opposed to diabetic person.
My answer is no, we should not be using the same language for each condition. For autism spectrum disorder, we should be using person first language, primarily because I argue that is the majority view of people on the spectrum in the United States. But depending on the condition, for some conditions, different forms of language are going to be perceived more differently, or in different ways, the terminology for them. For example, using the term cancerous person as opposed to a person with cancer would to most people feel more demeaning, would feel demeaning.
Thank you for that answer, Grant.
Should we ask you now?
Yeah, Margaret.
Grant, ask
I'll
Mark
be asking.
before.
I don't have the questions pulled up. I'll have to.
Here, I got you. Hi, Margaret, this question is for you. Is it easy to get into a habit of speaking regardless? Oh, sorry. Is it easy to get into a habit of speaking regarding person first language versus identity first language? Is there one right way to address the individuals? Or are we able to use both person first and identity first language in regard to written study?
Thank you, Alex, for that question. I feel like it is easy to get into a habit of using either person first language or identity first language. It also depends on how you are trained in ABA. For example, in regards to written study, I know some professors, some programs prefer that you use person first language when writing papers or doing presentations about autism spectrum disorder. Based on the research that we did and everything we heard in a debate tonight, I feel like there is not one right way to address those who are diagnosed with autism or or autistic people. It just depends on preference.
And then Margaret, you would just do the closing statement, and then that's it.
Oh.
Or like a thank you, like this concludes our debate.
Oh, okay. All right, well, this concludes our debate. I want to personally thank Grant, Tatum, and Alex for participating in the debate with us tonight. And thank you and have a good night.
Yay.
Let me end this recording real quick. How do I do that?
I think it'll just end it. Oh, can you stop it right now?
I did.